hearing,
Yep, this is the public hearing notice.
right?
This is a public hearing to review an application for a permit to keep animals and for a stable permit in accordance with the Town of Cohasset Board of Health rules and regulations governing horses, stables, cloven, hoofed livestock, fowl, and poultry, revised October 2014. We're holding this public hearing today on Wednesday, September 30th at 6:30 p.m. virtually via Zoom webinar to review an application for a permit to keep animals for a stable permit. The application has been submitted by Connor Cooper of 392 South Main Street, Cohasset, Massachusetts. The request for a stable permit will require variances to setbacks. The proposed plan for a stable is available to view on the Board of Health page on the town's website. The public's welcome to attend this hearing using login information below or to submit their input in writing by emailing pfahey@cohassetma.org prior to the hearing. So I guess that last sentence is not so relevant right now.
Okay, thank you, Michael. At this point, I'd like to inform the members of this public hearing that we have received some information from the town's environmental attorney, which is important because we need to address, or the Conservation Commission needs to address certain environmental issues before the Board of Health can move forward. I'd like to read part of the email from our attorney, Karis North. The Board of Health regulations require both an animal permit and a stable permit. The permit shall be, in quotes, shall be issued to the person having possession of the facility. Facility is the total accommodations to be used for housing, keeping, and/or care of one or more animals. Examples of a facility include, but are not limited to, barns, stables, coops, pens, lofts, corrals. Possession is not defined, but generally it is the owner of the property is defined as the possessor, unless that the owner does lease it out to a tenant, but still the owner must hold the permit. The applicant will need a separate permit to build a corral from the Conservation Commission, as the corral is within the 200-foot river. Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did everyone get the revised drawing? Because we submitted a revised drawing earlier this week that would eliminate that need for the 200-foot buffer encroachment.
Thank you for that information. However,
sorry.
The Conservation Commission has to rule on this. This is not a Board of Health issue. You understand? So let me continue, please.
Sure.
Again, the Conservation Commission is requiring that the corral, being within 200-foot riverfront boundary and also within the 100-foot wetlands buffer, must rule on the applicant's capability. The Board of Health cannot waive or otherwise diminish these separate requirements. A separate permit is required from the Conservation Commission when there are wetlands on the property. It also appears that the proposed work does not intend to change or increase the nonconformity, so it is okay with respect to zoning. And Section Q of our regulations, Board of Health regulations, allows for variances from Board of Health requirements when the proper process is follows. Those are only for Board of Health requirements. The Board of Health variance process cannot waive zoning requirements or the Conservation Wetlands Bylaw, Wetlands Protection Act requirements. And that is the sum total of a couple of other statements, but that is the basic statement by our attorney, environmental attorney for the town. It seems to me at this point to go through the whole process prior to having a Conservation Commission decision on this property would possibly lead to duplicative activity. In the event the Conservation Commission approves your application, then we will have to go through the whole process. So I'm suggesting that perhaps we do not go through the whole process tonight, since the whole application is now dependent upon Conservation Commission reading. Michael, Lynn, any comments?
You're on mute, Michael.
Yeah, it's standard. So just to be clear, Mr. Cooper, I think we have the latest version. It has the 200-foot riverfront running, the 200-foot blue line running through the corral. Is that right? With the 100-foot buffer, then just catching off the corner of the corral. Is that the right map? I'm looking for the date on it. It's kind of hard to do here.
Yeah, you would have received the hard copy. I thought, in conversation, the only issue was the 100-foot buffer zone from the wetlands. I do think, and would propose that we address this question of the stable itself, outside of the corral in terms of the board's viewpoint on that, because ultimately there's no sense in us, spending a lot of time on the corral component and redrawing the lines of the corral. I think I've mentioned numerous times we have a lot of flexibility with how that corral is positioned, and potentially could avoid any sort of wetlands, and probably would look to avoid it given our timeline to try and get moving with construction of the house. And this is ultimately something that's a big holdup for us as a family. These animals are important to us and important to the project as a whole to be able to house them there. So I'd propose talking through. I understand Robin's concern in terms of recreating the wheel, but again, we have plenty of flexibility to redraw the corral lines as needed and to the board's satisfaction, where it would avoid any sort of wetlands consideration. And ultimately, would like to at least understand where things stand specific to the stable portion, and some of the requested variances to be able to have animals in that stable. I guess that's where my head's at.
Thank you. Let me just repeat again verbatim. A separate permit is required from the Conservation Commission when there are wetlands on the property. And this is clearly the case here, and I am of the opinion that we can't go forward until the Conservation Commission gives us a blessing. Now, Michael, Lynn, do you want to comment on that?
I agree we can't go forward without the Conservation Committee, but I believe what Mr. Cooper is asking is for our feedback on whether, if the Conservation Committee did indeed approve it, whether or not, what our feelings are. Is that true, Mr. Cooper? The idea that if we're going to go ahead and say no to the variances, if the Conservation Committee agrees, then they've wasted the effort of going to the Conservation Committee to do the work.
True, and frankly, we're on a pretty brisk timeline. We've got a building permit that was submitted for the house itself, and ultimately have been doing extensive renovations on the barn to make sure it was structurally sound first and foremost, but then also accommodate animals. So any feedback that we could get tonight would be greatly appreciated, just because we can't really afford to wait another month to understand where we stand and whether or not this home is in fact going to work for us, which was an important component when we decided to bring our family here and purchase the home and begin the renovation process months ago, pre-COVID. So lots changed since then, obviously, and our timeline shifted out and kind of trying to navigate our path forward, to be honest.
So, am I muted? You can hear me? I'm reading this. So Pam shared with us the message about reached out to John Cabanero, and John saying that the wetland scientist is confirming the wetlands boundary.
Correct.
So that hasn't been done yet, though, right?
He did. Nope. Yesterday, his wetlands scientist was able to go by and take a look at the boundary and any sort of wetlands vegetation, and confirm that the 100-foot buffer is in fact accurate to to what the wetlands borderline would be.
I must point out that when you do go to the Conservation Commission, they will need that information in writing,
Sure.
not verbally.
Understood that. Yep. So I think, as I mentioned, there's been a number of different documents floating around. My wife and I tried to throw together some notes. I'm actually sorry, I'm in the car. I'm away from home today, down in New Jersey. But we had put together some notes specific to a neighbor that's across the street and some concerns that they had aired. So hopefully, I know we didn't, we've got 3 kids at home and animals, so trying to find the time to draft rebuttal to 26 points was a bit daunting, but we did pull together some insights. And, I think ultimately the way that kind of I'm looking at, I guess, the decision process is, first and foremost, can we use the stable? Secondly, do we need to do the corral in a way that may be different from what is outlined here? But the stable is in the existing barn usage is a key kind of gate point for us in terms of what we'll be able to do on the property. Before even considering how, the wetlands piece may play into the corral side of things.
Thanks, Michael or Lynn. Are you prepared to go forward, or do you want to continue the meeting until we get a reading from Conservation?
I think that, we have a bunch of data, and I think Robin mentioned that, we've gotten this packet of comments from your abutters, as well as your rebuttal, and they're all part of the meeting minutes, right? So we have all that information. It's quite a bit. I think I'm not one to go against the recommendations of town council, but I do think that it would be nice to be able to get a read on, whether this is like we're here, we've reviewed the materials. It'd be interesting to hear the presentation, just to talk about, and so let's have this conversation. I think we should have the conversation to just see if there's a showstopper before you go to the Conservation Commission. I think you're going to have to go to the Conservation Commission to get a ruling. It's just a matter of, yeah. But I mean, I don't know, Lynn, what do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think we're here. We should have the presentation. And again, we can't ultimately rule on it until the Conservation Committee rules on it, but we can at least have the conversation.
Okay, and we'll move forward. Let me suggest that the process be that the Coopers make a presentation, and then if we have any abutters available, for the abutters to then make their comments, and then we'll have a discussion back and forth between the Coopers and the abutters. Is that reasonable?
Sure.
Works for me.
Okay. Then.
Yes.
Coopers, make your presentation to us, please.
Sure. I guess I'll start things out, and since my wife and I couldn't be together tonight, just given the timing, maybe I'll try and hand off to her for any further comments. I think, one of the things that I would bring up is just a backdrop, and specific to even the conservation component. We did have, in light of some of the comments that came out, we did have a meeting at the property. I think that was about a week ago. Conservation agent was able to come and shared some insights that were included in some of the commentary that I submitted. I think I'll start by just going back to, acquiring the property back last fall. One of the things that drew us to the property in the first place was, it was an 1.5 acre lot. We read through the conservation the Board of Health rules and regulations, had a good handle on some of the restrictions that we may be facing. At the same time, recognized that, we had an antique house and an antique barn, and wanted to try and preserve, the property as is to the greatest degree possible. We have plans to expand the house, not so much change the front of the house, which is the I think it's about 1840s was when it was constructed originally, and and also it's an antique barn on a fieldstone foundation. So really trying to preserve a lot of the look and feel of the property as it stood for many, many years. The barn itself, we went and have already done a number of renovations to, strictly because it was nearly borderline condemned, being on a fieldstone foundation that wasn't mortared, as well as, just the structure of the barn as a whole in terms of, not being anywhere near code. So with some of the initial modifications we made, we actually have since brought the entire barn up to code and brought the electrical of the barn up to code. So that was an important piece in all of this. I think it was an unrealistic thing for us to even consider moving the barn. It wouldn't have held up, and frankly wouldn't want to disturb the property to that degree. So we're kind of working with the tools with which we were given in terms of the property itself. However, from day one, we made clear to not only some of the inquiries we made within the town, but to the neighbors as well, that we intended on bringing animals with us. Not all of our animals, because right now we have a farm in Norwell where we've got a couple of ponies that our kids ride, that we planned on putting into training, and then we've got the little white miniature horse that you've seen in maybe some of the pictures and within the packet, and then we've got some of our goats, the two Nubians, which we had originally, and then my wife, as an anniversary present, got the 3 Nigerian dwarf goats from a place up in New Hampshire, and they're pretty small. It's tough to tell the scale entirely, but you can see them with our 8-year-old daughter in one of the pictures, and I think they weigh probably no more than a bag of feed, probably about 50 pounds each. So they're pretty small in terms of the Nigerian dwarfs. So those are really, I think we're pretty transparent people. We put on the application that it's possible that we bring the pony by. I think I was in the back of my mind when I wrote that, thinking about, birthday parties, that kind of thing. If the kids wanted to have the pony at their house for a day, there's a possibility that one of the ponies may be there, but that's not our intent to house them there. And, we'd be happy to modify the application to just list the miniature horse, the 2 Nubian goats, and the 3 Nigerian dwarf goats in terms of what we had hoped to house in the stable. As far as some of the mindset, or I don't think any of us anticipated quite the same level of concern shared by one neighbor in particular across the street, which you saw a lengthy commentary with different what I would call research that he had done, but misleading in many ways, and honestly would question his intimate knowledge of kind of farm life or farmland, despite some of the claims that they live near farms and had talked to farm owners. My wife and I have been in the horse breeding business for a lot of years. She's been riding horses and having horses since she was 12 years old. So we've been around animals all of our lives, and have a great backdrop and as caretakers, and is embracing animals into our family. So we come from a position that's pretty well versed in animal care and proper care of animals, and what they need to I think from sizing of corral all the way through vet restrictions and considerations, and any sort of even animal control board, considerations around the proper latching and ensuring, proper storage of food. I mean, all those things that come up in the application is stuff that we know intimately well, from our backgrounds. As far as thinking through the specific variances that we knew we would need to be seeking, I think specific to the stable itself, excluding the corral, there's really 3 variances that seem to be most applicable. The first is, distance from a dwelling, which honestly is a little unclear to us in terms of what the risk is specific to distance from a dwelling. We have plenty of business partners that live in homes above barns in Kentucky. We have people that actually would feel much more comfortable if they were near their animals, should there ever be an emergency or anything else. 100 feet away, I believe, was the restriction. It just seemed far too far in terms of providing proper animal care. Sorry, go ahead, Robin.
Yes, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
before you go on, the
Sure.
three of us do have copies of the plan from Cavanero
Sure.
dated 8/10/2020. Could you just give us a sense of, walk us through the property so we can follow it on the plan? That would give us some assistance. Thank you.
Sure. And just to be clear, everyone's got the one that was, it was also a printed version that shows the corral just outside of the 100-foot buffer, in terms of how we redrew that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you'll see the, in the middle of the picture there, that's the existing barn. Again, antique barn. We've actually retained the facade as much as we've done some modifications to repair the sliding door and to the stalls, which would be on the right side of the barn, closer to, I guess, the columns on the right side of the page. If you picture the barn in half, the left half is actually just kind of an open space with a floor above it, which is kind of a loft area. And then the right side was where we've, prepared to put some stalls. Currently, everything is a gravel base. We do intend on pouring concrete on the left side, and then following the guidance of some of our collaborators on the horse front, putting a lime base on top of the gravel with mats, compacted, and then rubber mats, typical of any sort of barn stalls on top of that. As far as, care, I think there was a number of different pieces specific to the structure and latches. I would assure that all those are horse-free and horse-proof and proper in terms of how any of that would be set up. As you'll see, the green line is that 100-foot buffer where the corral kind of reaches just in the top left corner. It's just outside of that. To the left of the corral, there's a septic that's in an elevated kind of raised area. And that's where it connects through the septic components, which we're actually been proposing to move the tank as part of the construction of the house to ensure that it's meeting proper setbacks from the house, and some other considerations there that aren't as applicable to the conversation specific to the barn tonight, but that's is part of the plan. As far as abutters, we've got to the left, Gordon and his wife, and to the right, the Collins. And then the other person that attended and, like I said, made the comments. You can't see where their house is necessarily on this page. I believe there was a comment made by him that the way that it was put in wasn't accurate to the house that was torn down and replaced. I can tell you that everything is well set back out on the hill, and doing some quick math, it's probably about a football field away from the barn. So quite a distance, and much further than the Collins or Gordon Stevenson and his wife's property. The 100-foot radius is the red line that wraps around, which is used to notify butters. There's also consideration specific to the any sort of dwellings that may fall within the 100 feet of the stable/corral. We also have some red lines that would show the variances that we'd be requesting specific to the corral. There's a 23-foot from the Collins border of their property. Again, part of that determination of the line was we were kind of going just outside of the granite rocks that were on our property, and would in conversation with the Collins, again, if they have an issue and we need to move it to 7 feet over to be at that 30 feet and not require variances for that portion, then that's a conversation we'd be happy to have and make adjustments if need be. As far as on the left side, more specific to the barn, the house, and the septic, you see there's some measurements there reaching 9 feet from the what is proposed to be the addition to the barn. You can see the tan color is the existing house, and the shaded lines behind the house. Tough to do this via Zoom, but that would be the addition that we plan to put on, which actually fits within kind of all setback requirements, whether that's to neighbors, to wetlands, to any of those components, to kind of be a built by right in terms of an addition that we can put onto the house without requiring any further variances. Is how that that house addition piece has been submitted to the building inspector. So again, on the corner, you see there's a 9-foot passageway between the existing barn and the proposed addition of the house. From the existing septic, it's about a 23-foot setback to the tank and the switch, and then from the as-built septic leach field, it's about 13 feet to the corral. In addition to my comment earlier about the house, and honestly, our preference to be as close as possible to the animals to be able to monitor their health and well-being. There was something brought up with Cavanaro in discussion with him just earlier today, that in an inspection of the town rules and regulations more broadly, as well as some state regulations, there is, if we did the reverse and we're trying to put in a septic, there's no boundary or there's no setback requirement from a corral. So in theory, if we wanted to put a septic in, 5 feet or abutting the corral, there is no requirement in the reverse order, unlike, what we're talking about here with the Board of Health requirement and rules and regulations needing a variance to be within, I think it's 50 feet of the leach field to the corral. So it was just an interesting component that if it was in the reverse direction, no variance would be required. And I think that's an important thing as part of the consideration of the board for that variance being asked, because we don't see any direct impact either way between the septic and the animals, or the animals to the septic, that would come into play as part of that consideration. Anything else on this plan that you need me to touch base on that would help you to understand the layout?
That was actually really helpful. Thanks for that.
Again, tough to do it virtually without being able to point to things and trying to describe it as best I can as we walk through the different pieces here.
Yep.
So just as I was referencing, specific to the barn, it's really that distance to the dwelling, distance to the septic tank, and leach field are really the three variances that come into play most specific to the barn itself. As we stretch and we start talking about the corral, if we extend the right side of the corral as drawn there, closer to the border with that 23-foot setback from the property line, that's where we would be additionally having to consider the 23 feet versus 30 from the neighboring property line, and whether or not we want to grant a variance for that, or if we be asked to move the fence line in, and then the Collins house off that corner will come into play, as well as not being, again, that 100 feet from a dwelling. It's a neighboring dwelling in that case, not our own. But the corral would be within 100 feet of the neighboring dwelling. So there's two other variances once we start talking about the corral itself that would come into play.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
I'm sure you've done this experiment, right? But how much smaller, or what would the dimensions of that corral need to be in order to not require variances? I mean, the septic, right? I'm talking about the ones that actually directly would impact your neighbors, right? So, if you move as you're looking at the map, if you move the right side towards the left,
yep, how
far does it have to go, to get out so that your neighbor's house is outside of the 100-foot buffer, or the 100-foot zone, for example? So I'm sure you've played with these numbers. So talk a little bit about the impact of that.
Yeah, so we're trying to use, honestly, right angles and kind of work within the stone, and trying to keep it as, I guess, aesthetically pleasing as possible from the road, and honestly trying to be conscientious of our neighbors to make sure it was set up that way. In theory, based off some of the stuff we were looking at in terms of some of the calculations, you can't quite see, but if you see how we brought it off the barn, then kind of up in line with the barn, I guess is the best way to describe it in terms of being parallel. If we were to draw more of an angled line in front of those rocks and connect it towards that back corner, that's where we kind of just would be close. I'd have to play around with it to get exact with the engineer himself to know where we just get outside of the Collins dwelling. But obviously that would put us in a position to be able to be 30 feet off of the property line. And again, some of our consideration with how we drew the fence was actually standing on the property, looking where the rocks were, trying to figure out where we could run a fence in a straight line and then take a 90-degree angle and 90-degree angle. So again, part of it's coming back to, Colin's level of comfort in terms of having that fence, I guess, encroach towards their property line versus what the standard variance or standard setback would need to be. If that helps.
And that doesn't, and so, but you do that exercise and then the square footage of that corral doesn't become, say, too small for the number of animals that you want, for example.
No, correct. I mean, I think so we're looking at a corral size in terms of how it's currently laid out. That's over, 4,000 square feet. Currently our goats live in about a 1,600 square foot corral. And honestly, the pony the mini horse goes in there with them sometimes. And rule of thumb would be anything over 2,000 we'd be very comfortable with. So, you could cut this corral in half and still have it be fair and equitable for the animals. We're honestly, when it comes into all the other considerations, bigger is better, right? For animals to have plenty of space to roam and jump off rocks and properly graze and not tear up. I think one of the considerations from a lot of neighbors, they didn't want the lawn torn up, right? They were nervous about runoff. They were nervous about dust. Those are some of the points that were brought up. The bigger the corral, the less risk of any of that happening would be in our eyes. So, I think, again, if there wasn't a disagreement from the Collins perspective, then, we'd love to try and get that variance approved to be able just to kind of take it in a direction closer to as drawn.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else? You have the floor, so continue as you will and let us know.
Kevin, can you speak up a little bit? I'm sorry.
So unmuted, of course. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I apologize. You still have the floor,
Sure.
Mr. Kuba. If you want to give us any more information before we move on to some of your abutters who have specific comments that
Sure.
you maybe wish to rebut.
Sure. Sounds good. I don't think there's anything more specific to the drawing here. The one thing I would bring up in terms of, again, the process with which I guess I'm thinking through approvals, I would want to make sure we kind of extract the number of animals from the stable itself. I think, that was one thing as we thought through it, getting a stable permit would allow us to have, in theory, a horse, a cow, if you go down that list, there's certain things we could have without any further permitting. We're not looking to have a cow. We're not looking to have the chickens. We're looking to have our 3 little goats. So it's almost a separate permit issue. I think in conversation at the property, there was some concern about the number of animals that we were going to have. And that is, in my eyes, separate from the stable permit itself. That's actually just a separate discussion around getting permitted for in this case, which would be the 3 additional Nubian or Nigerian dwarf goats. Each of them about 50 pounds. It's essentially the same as having 1 more Nubian goat, but at the end of the day, I think without further permitting, once we have a stable, we would be able to have the Nubian goats and the mini horse, kind of within the guidelines or within the regulations. And then it would just be those 3 Nigerian dwarf goats that we're looking for further permitting on. Just to clarify, kind of for anyone that may be listening. As far as any other points, Colin, I just want to give you, I've been talking a lot, and I know you probably have a few things that you're chewing on that you may want to bring up before we open it up for abutters for any comments.
Well, I want to thank everybody for their time, but hi. I also want to just point out too that we fell in love with the property. It's absolutely gorgeous. Unfortunately, I don't have the paperwork with me because I was in and out of all sorts of meetings, but it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's timeless. We fell in love with it because it is an antique house and an antique barn. And as lovers of history and animals and the town of Cohasset, we really just wanted to kind of bring the life back into it, which is why we spent a lot of time making sure that, even in our architectural plans, that everything stays true to the nature of the house and the property. So that's our intent. We're not looking to ruffle any feathers. or cause a ruckus. We're a family of animal lovers and people lovers, and look forward to being part of a really wonderful town, so that our kids can grow up, in Cohasset. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think you covered all the logistics and all the points that you wanted to make. But happy to answer any questions.
No, I think Robin, I mean, I guess I turn the floor towards any sort of, abutters or other folks on the call that may have some questions, and happy to either answer questions or offer any further feedback as necessary.
Do we have any abutters on the call?
We do, Robin.
Can you get one? We'll do them one at a time, obviously. They can all, they have the audio, is that correct? They can hear?
Well, we can allow them if they, submit a Q&A. I mean, you guys received all the questions, comments. So do you want to further ask any of these questions? The Coopers answered some of them, or most of them. Do you want any follow-up questions with these? So like, for example, when it came to the questions from Mr. Eagles about the wetlands, it sounds like you're leaning towards having them go towards Concom for a notice of intent.
Correct.
And that would address any runoff issues.
Correct, of course. Well, let me ask a question, if I could.
Robin, again, you got to talk louder.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
How's this now? Better?
Yep.
Great.
Okay. I'm looking at the variance that talks about the setback from a septic component. I guess it's from the building. And it's from the from the barn. It's 23 feet. The requirement is 50 feet. Question I have is that is 23 feet enough? Or do we need to increase that space? And the only way you can do that, obviously, is moving the septic component.
Robin, if I could touch on that briefly, as you'll see in our plan, we do it. I don't have the distance. Unfortunately, I don't think they drew that. The tank is planned. We are planning on moving the tank or replacing the tank. I don't know which is more preferable in terms of disturbing the ground. So the tank would be what looks like probably another 10 feet away in terms of part of the plan around the addition to the house. You'll see that, I guess, to so it's almost like an open rectangle, and there's a note that's relocation from the porch, and it's actually, I don't know why it's a slab there. It's a column. We wouldn't put the porch on a slab. So it would in fact be further away than what's noted there.
So your intent is to move that pump further to the left, toward the
Correct. The tank. Yep. Yes, correct.
Would any other variances be needed if you went closer to the Stevenson property?
No,
Tank.
nothing that we're aware of with that tank move that would impact the Stevenson in any way. Again, not disturbing the actual septic leach field in that case.
So one thing to consider, I'm sorry, Michael, is that the setbacks to the septic system are local regulations, they're not state regulations. And so the questions you have to consider are, if you don't meet these setbacks, is this a risk to public health? And so typically you have setbacks from septic systems because they're considered a contamination source, and you have them if you need to set back from a water source, be it drinking water source, a surface water source. Typically it's not a corral. Usually there's two reasons for the setbacks. One is the contamination, And the second reason is to protect the physical septic system. Like you don't want to damage your leaching field. So you have to think about, is the activity that you're doing, constructing a corral, is that going to damage the septic system, leaching field if it's too close? So those are the things to consider whether or not you want to grant a variance. Is this a risk to public health? Is this also a risk for their septic system? Those are the kind of the two things to think about, whether or not it would be feasible to grant these variances.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. And I would just note that septic system, as it's outlined here, both the tank and the leach field itself are an elevated area. I think, Pam, you were out at the property and as part of that site visit and could see how the corral is set back quite a decent distance below where the leach field is, kind of up above in an elevated area.
I'm more concerned with the pump siting in terms of setback. That's a weak part of the system, the pump. The septic system itself is probably wonderful, maybe even oversized for what you want. But that pump would have to be moved. And the question is, at this point, you have 23 feet. I'll ask Pam, what is a reasonable distance to, again, protect the public health in the event that pump fails?
Just to clarify, there is no pump, Robin. I don't know where. It's just a tank.
Oh, tank. Okay, I'm sorry. The tank. Same question. My apologies. Same question.
If the tank were to fail, I wouldn't consider the barn or the corral a sensitive resource. Really, your most sensitive resource would be the river, so it's almost like the location of the corral and the barn are almost irrelevant. You would just really, you're trying to protect that water source in the wetlands. I don't see how increasing the distance at this point is really going to impact the corral at all, or vice versa.
Okay, thank you.
So Pam, I wanted to be clear. So have we invited the other participants to ask questions? Are we at that point yet where we're going to invite them to ask questions?
Well, they can if they want. They've submitted them already, and it's assumed that you guys have all read their comments and questions. I'm not sure if there's anything that you saw in there in the packet that you'd like to further.
No. I was just, because since Mr. Cooper went through that presentation and addressed certain points, and I'm just, if there were other follow-up questions from the abutters or other participants, then this would be a good time to ask them.
Exactly. We don't have any questions right now. I think people have just submitted what they wanted to ask in writing, and then we don't have any further ones right now for people that are listening.
Okay, does the board feel comfortable in moving ahead to vote on the variances? I believe we should probably proceed with the variances first.
Well, Robin, maybe what a good idea might be, it sounds like you guys want to continue this, right? Pending.
Correct.
They're going to Concom. So I guess the question is, there's no sense doing that if you find something that would harm public health or the environment. In other words, if you would just, there's no way you're going to change your mind, you're going to reject this. So maybe we should take a poll and find out if that's how you feel. And if that's how you feel, then it would just end tonight. If you don't feel there's any variances that could, hold this up, then you can continue and have him go to conservation. I know that was a little hard to understand.
One question that I guess I would have is, so first of all, we need to close the public part of the hearing so we can deliberate on this, right? And then we can have this conversation after the public portion of the hearing is, so i.e. no more comments from folks.
No, I don't think so. I don't think we want to close it if you're going to continue it. So that's the thing. I think that's
what I want to talk about though, is like, so it gets to sort of the thinking behind, can these variances actually fly or not?
Okay.
Because so just to be clear,
Right.
if I were going to be where I would, I'm putting myself in the position of homeowner. I'm saying, so if the Board of Health agrees that the variances, let's just say, are okay, pending the approval from the Conservation Commission, then they do the Conservation Commission process and then they're done.
And then they come back to you, or you could.
No, that's what I mean. We approve it conditionally.
Yeah.
Is that first of all, is that allowable? And second, can we talk about that sort of as a board right now?
If that's what you would like to do, yes, you can. Then you could close the public hearing and you could deliberate. Yes.
It does look like there's a question though.
Okay, it must have just come in. Jack Buckley says, is the question of animal waste runoff and animal waste management a concern of the board? Is this a question now in the jurisdiction of Concom?
I have a thought on that, but is that directed towards the chair?
It seems to me it's a Concom issue. Since we're not dealing with runoff.
Well, but I was thinking about the animal waste management is actually part of the Board of Health Rules and Regulations, section E6A. So maybe we can comment on so the question would be, I read this regulation as saying that the animal waste management is a concern of the board, but the runoff would be the Conservation Commission, but I think these are also kind of interrelated, right? So if the animal waste plan, which is the lined and covered trailer, if that's not sufficient, then I think it's a problem. But so that part I think is something we need to talk about, or we need to consider. And then there's another question also.
Sorry.
Would we necessarily consider that before we talk about variances or after the variances?
Well, we have a couple more questions, so why don't we?
Oh, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Why don't we talk about that? Sorry, Robin, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Okay, this is Gwyneth Trefethan. She says, please comment about the variance requiring the barn to be 100 feet from the column's dwelling. Do you mind if I just say something about that? I looked at that several times today on our GIS system, and it did not appear to be within 100 feet to me. No matter how many different ways I measured it, it was coming out to be 120 feet.
So do we have, well, I guess the question I would have is, do we work from the plot plan we have, or like we would have to confirm that actually?
That's a good idea. So
let me make a comment. It seems to me the variance would be the setback from the property boundary, not the Collins house.
No, there's a requirement of the 100 foot from the dwelling. That's a separate one. It's again in this rules and regs.
So you could add that on to, the further requirements. You could say you need to go to Concom for a notice of intent, and you would also like to have that verified by the engineer, the distance to the Collins' home. Because I'm not seeing it, but maybe I'm just not measuring it correctly, and you could have the engineer check that.
I guess the variance that they're suggesting is the 9 feet provided would be from the barn to the house, proposed house.
Correct.
That's the 9 feet. That's number.
Well, the facility includes the corral too, right? So it's the barn plus corral and 100 feet from there, I think. Is it the way I read that?
I measured it from the closest points. I measured it from the corner of the barn to the corner of their house, the shortest distance possible, and I was getting 120 feet.
So that seems like something
could
we
have that
also want to
verified by the
confirm.
engineer.
You measured from the corner of the barn to the Collins, the closest point on the Collins property,
Correct.
of the dwelling. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
I thought you just said the corner of the corral closest to the house,
No,
not the
corner of
barn.
the barn. So the corner of the barn is the closest piece to the Collins's house. So I measured from the corner of the barn to the corner of their house, the shortest distance possible. Again, considering the whole facility is the barn and the corral. So the
Isn't that
barn
what,
is-
that's what we need to consider though? That's the 100 feet we need, right? And so the closest part of the corral, the one that's, perhaps needs a setback anyway, but whatever. But I'm looking at the plot plan.
Michael, that sorry, chime in. My understanding is the barn would be outside of the 100 feet. The corner of the corral is drawn now would be within 100 feet of the Collins house. And that's where I made the reference earlier, specific to the Collins, would they have an issue with that corner being within 100 feet of their house and within 23 feet of their property? Or are we going to be in a position where we have to redraw the corral entirely? Which again, I guess, again, that first gate check with me was more the existing structure is the piece that is much harder for us to address or change. So getting some guidance on the three variances specific to that structure being the septic components, the septic leach field, and what will be the existing dwelling where we would inhabit. Those are the three kind of pressing variances specific to the barn itself. The rest of any other variances would be corral related in terms of how that was drawn or how that was approved. At least that's how I was viewing it, or that's my understanding. And again, I just go back to the engineer's comment that he passed along today. If we had the barn and the corral already there is no state or local regulation specific to putting the septic within however many feet, whether that's the tank or the septic leach field. So it's, again, some of this I'm going back through, rules and regulations that were written a long time ago, but at the end of the day, there's a rule and regulation to add the corral after the fact. But if it was the reverse scenario, there would be no rule and regulation that would come into play on the septic stuff.
Yeah, the septic I'm less concerned about. I'm actually talking more just about the 100 foot to
Gotcha.
over the neighbor's house.
Yeah, I
and
understand.
misspoke. I'm sorry, you're right. It is within the 100 foot. I apologize.
Okay,
Corral.
that's good to know.
Yep.
That's good to know. So, okay, but we also just discussed that the reshaping of the corral could actually get past that without the variance, right? And so, right, that was one of the questions I asked early on, right? If you were to reshape that corral, you could get it inside or outside that 100 foot, and then that variance isn't really needed.
We could. Again, I think it would be less aesthetically pleasing, probably actually for the person who asked the question on the phone lives across the street. So I don't know if they'd want to see an angled fence versus a kind of right angles in terms of how it was set up. And again, I think some of it would hinge on the Collins not having I don't see a public health component other than the Collins, right? Like the corral being within 100 feet of that dwelling is probably more of a neighbor consideration than a public health consideration, possibly.
I was just actually just making the point I guess I'm trying to make is, if you wanted to take that variance off the table, you could, right? And there wouldn't be a huge net effect to your neighbor other than the fence won't be as close to their house. The net actual effect of what that actually leads to day to day is minimal importance. But
Understood.
Anyway, there are other questions.
We could again, if that was a recommendation of the board to approve the barn, but need to address the corral, shape to avoid those variances, that's something we could consider and honestly revisit with the Collins if they were okay with that setback as a specific, after the fact. I mean, we're not doing anything to the corral today. It's more about the stable and understanding if we're going to be able to use the existing barn and in those setbacks specific to the house and the septic. That's our biggest concern as, kind of the property owners trying to understand if we're going to be able to have animals there in the future and what we're doing in terms of any further renovation to the barn and the house and everything else. So.
We do have more additional questions. If people swim in the marsh, this is from Leslie Cahill. If people swim in the marsh, does this issue come into play with the waste management issue, i.e. runoff?
I think that's going to be an issue for Concom to make a decision on.
The way I view that, the answer to that question is, considering the quality of the manure management plan, if that manure management plan works fine, then the runoff is less of an issue. The management plan is in our purview, the runoff is not. So I look at that as, the Board of Health question, I think, is whether that manure management plan is sufficient in terms of its, not being leaking. And the flip side, of course, though, or if you have animals that are out and around in the corral, waste can then be dropped there and then run off. That's another question that I think that is something that's actually the question I think the Conservation Commission would be that's the one they need to answer, I think.
Yep. And as a comment to that, the conservation agent, was it Jeff, Pam? I think it's Jeff. Is that right?
It's Jeff Summers, yeah.
Yeah. So Jeff did join us briefly when we were at the site visit, and his initial reaction was he had no concern about runoff or any sort of, wetlands contamination. Again, anything that this board approves could be contingent on us bringing it to them, as Robin highlighted at the onset. But the initial feedback from Jeff was that it wasn't anything of direct concern from his standpoint.
And what's important is the decision of the board members, of the commission members of Concom. Not. I'm sure.
Oh, I understand.
They will follow.
I'm just saying the guidance. Yep.
They will follow Jeff's recommendations, but the issue is the commission has to decide on that.
Yep, I understand.
Okay, let's ready for the next question. This is from Fran Collins. First of all, he clarified that it is 114 feet from the barn to his house scaled off the drawing. I acknowledge, sorry about that. It's true. So his question is, when is the amount of animals allowed to be discussed?
That would be discussion of the permit. Is that not correct?
So there are two different permits. There's the animal permit, and then there is the stable permit. And the stable permit is the one that, requires the variances and requires, this consideration. The animal permit, someone's allowed to ask for, animals based on the size of the lot. And it's 25,000 square feet per horse. There's one horse. And then each additional goat beyond 2 goats, I believe, it's up to the discretion of the board how big the land is. So in total, they have 67,000 square feet approximately. And I asked the lawyer if you deduct the amount of wetlands out of that in terms of like what is considered usable space within a lot. And she says you don't do that. You do consider the entire 67,000 square feet when you're, calculating how many animals you can have. So they have the 25,000 square feet for one horse, and then they have, additional whatever 67 minus 25,000 square feet is, for goats. So it would seem they do have enough room for the animals that are being requested.
Pam, a question, please. Would not it be reasonable to take out the barn and the proposed and current house? Because obviously you can't graze in that area. I wouldn't know why they would not take that out of consideration. I think it would still pass the muster, but that makes sense?
It seems like by quite a bit too. I mean, those as a percentage of the square footage of the lot, it's pretty small, relatively speaking. Exactly. I don't think it's. Actually, the other question that I have, or the other point I kind of want to make is that the guidelines that Pam just outlined, they say horse. They don't refer to the size of your horse. They don't refer to and that's I think where the discretion has to come. with respect to the board, right? So miniature goats, miniature goats, is that what they call them? No, miniature horse and dwarf goats, I guess is the, I'm looking to Mr. Cooper for, yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah, mini horse and Nigerian dwarf goats, and then the 2 Nubian goats, which are more the normal size goat.
Right, okay. So, that the consideration that I would have is the size of the animals is also important. So,
Okay.
At this point, it would appear that there's enough property to.
It is based on
accommodate
lot
those.
size.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there's enough for the lot size to accommodate that number of animals. Any questions on that? We can move to a vote on.
Sorry, Rob, there's still a couple more questions.
Oh, sorry. Yep, I can't see the questions. That's why I'm.
Okay. So Gwen has second question, is it the facility or the barn? Thank you for the clarification. So the facility includes both the barn and the corral. They're together, they're combined, and they make up the facility, and all the setbacks are applicable to the facility. Fran Collins has another question. Sideline scaled off the drawing is 24 inches, not a problem. Okay, I think that's going back to, my mistake again. Then Fran Collins says, I have no awareness of the Concom member making any evaluation of runoff from the corral. I was there and listening to the Concom member. Okay, so that was the conservation agent. He's the agent to the Conservation Commission. That was just an informal evaluation, and we were asking him if there were going to be any issues. And it was just kind of his opinion there on the spot that he didn't think there would be. And then I double checked with our lawyer, our environmental lawyer, to find out if there would be any issues with any boards that include zoning, planning, conservation. And it was the lawyer's opinion that it should go before Concom, to file for a notice of intent. And I told Jeff that, and the two of us got on the phone with her and discussed it, and he agreed. I mean, when it comes to conservation, it can be very subjective. It's not a very black and white science at all. It's very subjective. So his initial comments were informal, and so it was the lawyer's conclusion, and Jeff concurred that it should go before Concom. And that looks like that's it for the questions.
one more
Let's do anything. Oh,
from Jack.
okay, sorry about that. Oh, 2 more. With respect to the waste management plan currently on file with the Board of Health, do members of the board believe that the management plan satisfies the state and local regulations? If there are any concerns, what are they?
So I'm trying to find the actual local regulations. So the waste management plan that is in this packet of information.
Mm-hmm.
Actively manage manure waste of the Cohasset property. The waste will be dumped into a closed dump trailer stored behind the barn. Upon reaching capacity, the waste will be transported to an appropriate facility for disposal. The closed trailer will also be tarped to prevent runoff while being filled over time. There was a question actually, and perhaps Mr. Cooper, you can address this. There was a question from one of your neighbors asking about drainage out of the trailer. So it's tarped, but there's the matter of runoff out of the trailer. Can you comment on your experience with that, and what's your sense of the impact of that?
Yeah. So I think the expectation in terms of how we were going to tarp it was underneath, lining the trailer as well as covering it. So it would be prevent the rain from being able to get in and create, pooling within it beyond the waste that's in there, as well as, have a liner to the trailer so it couldn't run out.
Got it.
And again, I think we're trying to put our best plan together as to how to address it. I think, I've been to a lot of different farms, and this is probably the most comprehensive way of containing manure. aside from sticking it in buckets and carrying it out, one trash barrel full at a time or something, which I think wouldn't be feasible.
I want to chime. I'm sorry. I'm driving home to put the kids to bed, so I can't be on the video. But I do just want to chime in, and this is probably something that we'll talk about with Concom. But in the packet of information we've given you, we included some links, and I think this comment is more just for the neighbors and town members on the meeting. I think it's important to note that the animals we have, we're proposing to have on the property. Their manure is actually quite good for it's a great fertilizer. It's probably something many people buy to put in their gardens, from Lowe's or from their local nursery. Goat manure and horse manure, both their papers of research done on this, pose no health concern to humans, carry no known issues, unlike wildlife manure, poop, and urine. So really, honestly, the animals that we're proposing to have, especially since we keep them wormed and, in great health, really their manure and urine pose no known health effects to humans. And I mean, that's documented research.
I believe we still have another question or two. Leslie Cahill asks, will the waste management plan include daily cleaning of all manure from the pasture? Oops, I'm sorry, I skipped a question. Fran, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, so I guess I can answer that. We try and keep our pastures clean. I mean, to say daily might be, I try to be a realist and be transparent. I can't imagine that it would necessarily need daily cleaning. Most of the animals are what we found is they tend to do their business in their stalls for the majority of the time, and the only animals that, it's really minimal manure that even is generated by the miniature horse, which would be the largest potential contributor. In the pasture, the goat poop is pretty small. I don't know how we'd necessarily clean that up other than it just break down over time in terms of what's in the pasture. The miniature horse poop we could, scoop up on a regular basis. I wouldn't necessarily commit to daily. I think that would be an unreasonable expectation or something I wouldn't want to mislead anyone on, but on a regular basis, multiple times a week, making sure that that's picked up and clean is honestly a chore of our children. So it's reasonable to think that we'd be on top of it, and honestly we're not looking to harm the aesthetics. And I think there's some concern around, property values. And if anyone's looked at the plan, we plan to put a home and barn and stable together that should elevate property values throughout the neighborhood, as opposed to dragging them in some way. So I'd like to alleviate that concern, just based off what we're doing to the property and what the current value was versus what it will be.
I'll read the next question. This is from Fran Collins. He says the marshland has some fairly tight restrictions from the state as to use, so it probably could not be used for animal use. But I think that's for the Concom to decide. Susan Cahill asked, if the owners wish to have a full-size horse or more animals, does a new permit have to be obtained? I could answer that, yes. I mean, there's two permits that are necessary, an animal permit and the stable permit. The animal permit will say exactly on it how many animals that it's for. So if there are any changes, it would have to be a new request to the board. Then Fran Collins says, the size of the animals should have no bearing on the number of animals that matter. And I object to 6 or 7 animals, small or large. Oh, that's from Gail Collins.
Yeah, Gail has made her voice known, and if she met them, she may feel differently because I think size absolutely does have a bearing, especially with all of the calculations and commentary that are Mr. Eagles shared in terms of his, assessment on calculations of manure generation and anything else. And can I just highlight, this is our family we're talking about. So if I get defensive, our son goes out and plays goat school every day with these goats. He loves them, and I'm not going to take them away from him. And to be honest, if we can't bring our 5 goats to this property, then we'll be selling this property, and God knows what, who will end up taking it on. Because that's just it's why we're here tonight. We're here to talk about being able to bring our family members, our extended family members, to this property and ensure that that's something we're able to do.
Understood. Our next question is from Gwen, and she says, please comment on the requirement of a drainage plan. That was one of the things. Was there no specific drainage plan submitted, I think?
Yeah, Pam, I can comment. I mean, when we were doing all the calculations on the house, I know there's some drainage considerations when you get over a certain square footage of impervious surface area as it relates to the property. The engineer had, we are making some modifications to the driveway when we do that to make sure that the house doesn't extend over that, but it was to a degree where we didn't have to have a drainage plan for the site plan. If there's something specific to the Board of Health consideration, the stable, I didn't see anything that was a requirement to submit a plan on that front.
Well, that's actually I see it I've lost it now because too many windows open here. In the front page of the application for a stable permit, at the bottom of it, new stable application, submit the application, the fee, notify the abutters, plot plan. The plot plan must include all structures, location of the proposed stable, fences, wetlands, location of sewer or septic, and all proposed drainage plans. I guess I don't know what does that usually, what would that look like, I guess is my question, Pam.
I think what you would probably need to do is have, if you come back again, right? If this goes forward, if this hearing is continued and you get permission from Concom and then you come back again, I really recommend that you bring John Cavanaro with you, your engineer. And from an engineering standpoint, he can really explain whether or not you need one. And if you need one, he can create one for you. I think this is kind of a question that should come out of this hearing, is whether or not one is needed. And I will talk again to our environmental lawyer about it, and I recommend that you talk to John Cavanaro about it so we can both find out the answer, because I don't know the answer myself right now.
Yeah, again, we've pulled a lot of different plans, and I think some of it was there was no specific drainage plan that he felt was required as we were looking at the building. We had to submit for the building permit, and there was nothing that he had identified that would be a requirement, nor did the building inspector in terms of things we were doing by right versus what would require variances or additional plans beyond the site plan that's outlined here. But obviously could follow up in terms of, any sort of discussion point ahead of conservation.
I think we need.
You should follow up because conservation may have a different read on that particular issue.
Sure.
More questions, Pam?
Another question. Leslie Cahill asked, it was unclear to me, has the animal permit been revised for just one horse? So I think on the initial application, it did say possibly, the pony. So I think we probably need definitively one way or another,
Yep, you can strike the pony. We have no plans to have it there on a permanent basis at all, and we'll just not bring it for birthday parties if that's what the neighbors suggest.
Do the board members want a resubmitted application?
I mean, I think that's, if, you know, if we decide to act on this tonight, and, you know, even, I think that we basically make that point and just say that the permit would be approved minus the pony. I guess that would be the easiest way to do it.
And then the Connors would have to come in for an amendment to their permit. Is that correct, Pam? If they wanted to have, say, a horse there on any particular Saturday or something.
Not the Connors, the Coopers, right?
Oh, well, there is a Connor there. Connor Cooper, unfortunately. Is that correct, Pam? We could have they could ask for an amendment to their permit based upon a specific date.
Well, if you were going to approve a permit tonight for animals, you'd probably want to approve it just for the one miniature horse.
Right.
And then in the future, if they wanted to actually add the other horse, then they would have to probably come before the board for a new permit.
So that would include bringing a horse in, or pony in for, say, a children's birthday party, etc. They would require a new permit, not just a
That I'm not sure about, honestly. I mean, that could be another question again for our environmental lawyer. I can't answer that.
Pam, we would elect to deal with that on a one-off basis if it arose, and wouldn't be something we need to consider as part of the, you know, the permit here.
Okay. And then it looks like we have a final comment. Nope, we have more than that. Gail Collins just is making a comment saying, I'm very familiar with dwarf goats. And Leslie Cahill says, I thought the town regs allowed for day hopping. Now, I'm not familiar with day hopping. I know it's in here, I should probably know, but does that just mean you bring a horse over for one day?
I assume that's what it is, but it could mean something entirely different.
I think the question is, I think we can, I mean, that's an interesting observation, but I think that we can probably move past the question, given that the owners are saying just strike the pony from the permit.
Okay.
Yeah, we've never had plans to bring the larger pony. Quite honestly, she works part-time as a therapeutic riding horse, so she's very busy and doesn't need to be coming to Cohasset.
Okay. I believe that is all the questions that we have.
Okay, then let's move on again with the animal permit. Are we ready to make a motion on the animal permit?
Well, so have you decided that if you're going to continue this, or are you going to make decisions tonight?
Also, my suggestion would be that we conditionally act, right? So we either approve or not, but any approval is contingent on the Conservation Commission approval. That would be my suggestion, just in the sake of.
Seems reasonable to at least make a decision on the two different kind of permits, the stable permit and the animal permit, and let it move on from there. And I would recommend that we continue the meeting until there's a definitive statement from conservation.
Robin, we can't really hear you again. I'm sorry.
I said it seems reasonable to me to have decisions made on the two permits, the animal and the stable permit, and then continue the meeting until such time as the Conservation Commission comes up with decision from their end, and then we re-engage.
So you're suggesting we make a decision tonight, but we don't vote on it until the Conservation Commission weighs in?
I'm suggesting we vote on the permits, just
Yeah.
the permits. And if they're approved in the record, and then everything is dependent upon the Conservation Commission. Well,
Right.
that's just to move the process along rather than
Yes.
wait along.
So then we don't have to come
Appreciate that.
back though. But then we don't have to come back, right? If we conditionally approve these things, we don't have to come back after the Concom weighs in.
Well, no, these are just
Just
for the
one thing
permits.
though, it is, if you were planning to have them go back and redo the plans to change so that they don't have the variances to the distance to the house or the distance to the property line.
You know, this would give the Coopers, I was going to say the Connors, but this would give the Coopers the opportunity to, if they wanted to move those lines for the corral, if they desired to do that. But Lynn, are you there? What's your opinion? Is Lynn on, or she
Oh, it looks like she's,
muted? It appears to me.
hang on 1 second. It looks like she dropped off. Oh. Oh boy.
Well, if we cannot get Lynn back on, I would then suggest we not look at the permits tonight and wait till after Concom. Because we should have all three members of the board voting on anything.
I understand. Respectfully, Robin, the Concom piece is going to take some time, and we have some decisions to make on this property. So if there is some sort of guidance, whether formally or informally, it would be much appreciated knowing what direction we may or may not be able to head with the stable, because that has ramifications to how we act over the next 30 to 60 days, to be honest with you.
So I would say, I don't know if it's okay to talk about where my position is on this. Pam, am I going to violate any? I don't want to violate any rules. So here's where I'm thinking. Okay. I believe that the animal permit is fine. Especially taking into account, I respectfully disagree with Ms. Collins next door about, I think size does actually matter in this case. I think it's when we're talking about the number of animals versus the size of the animals, I think, having more of smaller animals from the point of view of the Board of Health, the health impact of that, I think that it's definitely a difference. So I'm in favor of the animal permit. In terms of the variances, I am positively disposed towards the variances for the septic. My recommendation would be to make accommodations to make your facility, your corral, so that it's not 100 feet into your neighbor's house. But I'm not, that would make that variance go away entirely by redesign. And then the third variance is which one? There is
a variance to our own residents.
Oh,
So SAS to the residents, Cooper's residents, 100 foot is required, and 13 feet is what we see on the plan.
right. And so so the septic and your own home setbacks, I am, positively disposed to. The 100 foot to your neighbor, I would say that you should consider revising the plan. This is just my opinion. I don't know. So the Conservation Commission, I think, is going to give you some useful information about what to do with respect to that waste, to make sure that maybe the position of the trailer elsewhere, right, not as far down. I honestly don't know what they'll say, to be honest. But I am not as concerned about the runoff, particularly if that corral is resized and you keep the waste the way that you say you're going to keep it. So that's where I would be. So that's where I would be standing, and I would be. So if that's the readout you're looking for, is how we're thinking about it, even if we don't vote on it tonight, so that you know that if you get the Conservation Commission, unless something crazy comes up that we didn't foresee, right? But I'm just that would be my personal position on it. Robin?
That seems like a very reasonable approach. But I would like to include Lynn on this issue.
Yep.
You know what, you guys, I actually have Lynn on my phone. Lynn, do you want to speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
For some reason,
Yep.
I you guys. Wait, hold on. Let me mute myself. All right. I'll just sign back on. I actually everything that Michael said, I agree with. It sounds like a way to go forward.
Is that it, Lynn?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Any technical problems here, apparently.
Okay.
I will also state that I'm really actually, as painful as this has been, probably for the neighborhood, to go through this process. I think that the conversation that was brought up was really enlightened us on the board in terms of what the questions were. So I just, I want to make sure that your neighbors hear this, that my position takes that into account. And I believe, and I really appreciate their thoughtful sort of approach to the questions and to the prep for the meeting. So thank you for that.
Are we ready to move on the permit, animal permit? Lynn, we have Lynn on phone?
I'm here, but I'm track of the hospital.
I thought we were going to continue all that to the next meeting.
Yeah, I did too.
Well, we can do that as well.
Let's
That's
do it
fine.
after Concom. But we did just discuss that we're the favorable sort of leaning towards the approvals.
Yeah, I mean, if it's possible to get that vote from the three of you, just to have some sort of concrete path forward, that would be far give us a much greater degree of comfort. And if that needs to happen with the requirement of adjusting the corral to eliminate those setback or those additional variances, obviously that could be a requirement, much like, getting the Concom sign off. We're just trying to obviously expedite the process and thinking, to get final approvals with a barn that, is partially constructed. We'd be stretching our timeline out quite a way to go to COMCOM, give notice, go to COMCOM, get their approval, and then come back to the next meeting. We're probably looking towards this November at the earliest, possibly December, which is quite a ways out for us to push our plan forward and construction plans forward without some sort of definitive.
I think the challenge is that,
I mean?
yeah, but I think the challenge is for us is that it's hard to vote on a redesigned plot plan without actually having something to talk about. You know what I mean? So I'm sensitive to your concern about timing, but from my perspective, it's, I think that actually has to be done to demonstrate that it's outside either you redesigned it outside the, so that the redesign was actually done and that it's feasible. Concom has seen it. In fact, they're going to probably want to see that before anyway. You know what I mean? So I think Concom will want to see that redesigned corral, which addresses some of these concerns. So.
Okay. I mean, just to put you in the position of the homeowner here that's very passionate about their animals, we're about to invest $1 million into a property, and I'm having a real struggle with how we move forward and confidently move forward, knowing that we're going to be able to have our animals there. That's honestly why we're here tonight, was trying to get some guidance. And I do appreciate the concern. Again, just trying to see if there's some way we can get some sort of definitive path. And I do understand, making sure the corral is outside of that 100-foot and 30-foot buffer to the neighbor would be a requirement with any plan. And maybe it's tentative approval and we come back with the plan for you to give final approval on or something. I don't know don't know how that could be done. But obviously adjusting fence lines to accommodate that. We know the barn itself far enough out, so I'm sure we can come up with a plan for the fence lines that would accommodate that request if that's a contingent component of voting.
Well, it sounds like the board no one said that they would reject you. It sounds like if you can meet their requests, it sounds like they've given you as much of a positive answer as they can possibly give you at this time without having a definitive final plan.
Okay.
Yeah, the fact is, we must see a final plan. We just cannot act upon a promise.
No, it wouldn't be a promise. It would be an in-writing contingency. Was what I was
I
stating
mean, that's
for both ends.
that's what we're looking for. Something in writing to indicate what your plans going forward will be.
Understand.
So is that okay? Is that a good, nice way to put it?
Do we need to move to table to continue this? We need a motion to continue this to post the Conservation Commission ruling on this matter. So I so move.
I'll second that. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 Okay. Motion carries 3-0. Okay, now, Pam, before we move on, do we have to take up the septic issue that we chatted about?
You do. And so Connor needs to stay on because now we need to take up a separate issue of his septic system on his property. And Connor, I'll explain it if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
stay quiet.
So in order to seek a building permit, they have to have sign off from Board of Health. And it looked like their design septic system plan was for a 3-bedroom home. But their building plans call for a 4-bedroom home. So it turns out that when you look at back the original plan, the way it was designed, the soil evaluator back in 1995 said that the soils were silty clay. Now that seems pretty unusual. You don't usually see silty clay in Cohasset. They tend to be some type of sands. So Morris Engineering went out to the site, and I went out as well. And Jeff Hassett's a soil evaluator, certified soil evaluator, and so am I. And they dug a test pit adjacent to their existing septic system. And we went down, I believe it was 60 inches, and looked at the soils, and sure enough, they are in fact loamy sands, which is what was kind of suspected all along. And that's based on, if you look at a USDA soil website, you can zoom in right on the yard at 392 South Main Street. And according to that database, it says that it should be fine sandy loam. I'm sorry, I don't have this right in front of me. Let me just, there we go. It's under a pile of stuff. So it's sandy loam. It's sandy loam according to the soil website, and it was sandy loam according to when we looked inside the test pit. So Jeff Hassett from Morse Engineering said, now, if the sands are actually sandy loam and not silty clay, if you do the effluent loading rates, and you come up with the size of the leaching field that would be required for a 4-bedroom home, their existing system more than meets that. So in other words, it was originally designed on the wrong soil type, and it was over-designed. It was a very large system, assuming it was clay. So when you plug in actually the correct soil type, you realize that their large leaching field is enough to accommodate a 4-bedroom home. So the reason that they're coming before the board tonight is to actually make it official, to do like an official amendment to that their original system design from 1995. So I put out a potential, motion for you guys since it's a little complicated. But if you do agree with these findings and it's stamped by Jeff Hassett, you can make a motion to formally approve the new redesign or the new redesign calculations confirming that it's actually big enough for a 4-bedroom system.
Okay, I can make that motion if you'd like. I move that we amend the existing septic plan to include the new calculations made by Morse Engineering, which indicate that the SAS is large enough to accommodate a 4-bedroom house. Do I hear a second?
I will second that.
I second.
Okay. Any discussion? Well, let's move to a vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries 3-0. I think at this point, we can relieve the Coopers of their stress and they can go home and have a libation because the night is finished as far as the Coopers are concerned. So, and you will let us know, or we can find out when your Concom appointment is so we can act accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Very nice to meet you all virtually.
Thank you
I
for
know
your
this is
time.
An awkward way to go through this process in any situation, but nice to meet you all. Appreciate the guidance and look forward to hopefully moving things along in the near future.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Have a
Good
nice
night.
evening.
Thanks for your help, everybody. Night.
Night.
We don't have any other agenda items, do we?
Do we have to approve the minutes from August? I don't have any.
Way back.
It's August.
Yep.
Last one I looked at.
Oh, even further back, I think. I don't know. Hang on a second.
Whatever Amy sent us.
Amy, you want to get off mute? June 22nd. Oh, June 22nd. Sorry. Do you have the meeting minutes from June 22nd?
I commented, I thought it was on.
Yep, I see it. And yes, and I'm good with it too. So I will move to accept the minutes as updated by Robin.
Okay, I'll second that. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. Is there any other business that should come to the board tonight? Well, by the face you made, you're saying no.
I will say that I've been just grateful that we've gotten those weekly reports as we've gone along the process, this COVID process. So thanks to Pam and Mary for the sort of continued feedback, and Robin, thanks for the readouts from the department heads meetings every week too.
Yeah, I'll try to keep you informed. I'd like to add my kudos, or a kudo at least, to Pam, who's keeping us on the straight and narrow. Thank you, thank you.
This was a hard meeting tonight, you guys. I don't know. I think we did okay. I don't know. It was very difficult, but.
Well, I think you managed the process of the meeting.
Pam, you did awesome.
Yeah, you did an excellent way of managing the meeting, and I think it made it easy for all of us.
Yep. And so we're going to have a very, very large file for this week's meeting minutes. Normally it's a couple pages, but we're going to have 3 months worth of weekly reports from me and Mary, all this packet of information from the 392 South Main Street. So I think we earned our pay this month, all of us.
Okay, so if there's no further business, let's adjourn the meeting at 8:12 p.m. All in favor?
Before,
Oh,
I second. Sorry, I second it.
You sure you want to say something, Lynn?
It's okay. We can adjourn it and you can ask me a question.
So
No,
we still,
if I raise my hand on the Zoom, if Pam can see it. I was trying to raise my hand.
I don't even
No?
see you at all, Lynn. Like, normally.
she's on the
chat
attendee
shows up.
list. She's on the attendee list.
Yeah, I
I
can
can
see her
s-
raising her hand. Pam,
Can you?
if you go into attendees, I can see her hand up.
That's when I said, Pam, I'm here.
Yeah,
I
I
saw
saw
it.
that.
I saw her when you sent me it
Yeah.
as an email, but I still don't even see you. Like, there's
So
Pam.
when you go to the participants button,
It's so
It should-
weird.
you can see panelists and attendees. There's an attendee tab. Well, I don't know if you can see it, but I can see it. There are 2 tabs under the participants menu.
No.
I clicking on Lynn, it shows just a microphone. I think.
Well, see, I don't even see her. I've got Michael, it's Mary, Amy, and Robin. And when I do participants,
You get nine participants, panelists 4 and attendees 5.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, there she
You know,
is. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have, if I knew you were over in attendees, I would have switched you over. Sorry about that. All right. Anyway, sorry about that.
Now we know what she looks like anyway, right? Not an imposter at the other end of that phone, is there?
No.
Okay,
Maybe.
make a motion to adjourn. There's a
So
second.
moved.
So moved. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries 3-0. Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good night,
Aye.
everybody.
Mary,